Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Of the many excellent texts on leadership in the Catholic Church's tradition, the Rule of Saint Benedict surely holds a pride of place. Written around 530 AD by St. Benedict of Nursia, this text provided the foundation for the way of life of his monks, a way of life that shaped many of our traditions in Western civilization. This is why his take on leadership is so important, and he provides us with a valuable lesson in our ongoing series on the lessons of leadership from the saints. Hey everybody, I hope you're enjoying this series as much as I am. We're going on looking at how the saints lived leadership themselves and what they wrote about it and what they did. And I just want to take these randomly from different stories of the lives of the saints. And that's why I have to, right at the beginning of this, focus in on St. Benedict of Nursia. In his rule of life that he wrote for the monks that were under his authority, he gives guidance to the abbot, right, about how to exert authority over the monks who are entrusted to him. And what's fascinating to me is that he goes right to the Bible and quotes Titus 2:15, where St. Paul tells St. Titus to convince, to entreat, and to rebuke with all authority, okay, those who are underneath him. Those three words form the framework for how St. Benedict sees the role of an authority in the Christian community. And I want to bring these out because I think that we can apply these, obviously, with due proportion in our companies, but we can also look really profoundly at how we're parenting and how we are being an aunt or an uncle to those who are entrusted to us if we don't have any children. Because those three words, Benedict breaks down for us into three practical ways to exert the authority that God gave to us. Now, I'm going to get into each one of those three a little bit later and kind of break them down in practicality for us, for how we can apply them. But I want to start off by speaking about Benedict's vision for authority, okay? Because I think this is a spot where a lot of us stumble. You know, when we look at authority, a lot of times people are scared of it, especially today. Because it just seems like authority means imposing what we believe on other people, or it means being, confrontational about our position. It's just really a hard thing to exert over anybody. It's a hard thing to parent. It's a hard thing to set a culture at a company. It's a hard thing to lead. I think we can all understand this and empathize, because we live in a culture today where truth is held as something questionable. It's almost like the fashion of the day to say that there is no truth. And if there is no truth, well, then there is no right way to govern. And if there's no right way to govern, then exercising authority is almost doomed to be seen as an imposition or to violate someone's rights. It sets us up for conflict that we really would rather not have. It's a very uncomfortable thing to be in the position of trying to lead others by shaping their behavior when the culture around us says there's no objective norm for what that behavior should be. That's very problematic. We see it in our parenting. We see it in our businesses. We see it in our interactions with our friends. I mean, it's almost like people saying, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge that person? Who am I to judge you? And yet, it's fascinating to me because if to say that there is no truth is an affirmation of truth itself. Okay, that's the problem. Because you're saying that it is absolutely certain that we cannot be certain. And that's a contradiction. You're saying it's absolutely true that there's no absolute truth. You see, it just doesn't hold up, right? There has to be truth. One way or the other, there has to be. Otherwise, our minds couldn't function properly. And in any case, as Christians, we believe in truth because Jesus himself said, I am the way and the truth and the life. And so we owe it to our fellow human beings to say, we don't have to live life arbitrarily. There is a right way to live. And yes, therefore, there's also a wrong way to live, but there's a right way to live. And what's neat about that is that means that the one who's exercising authority, the one in charge, can relax a little bit. Meaning, it's like he doesn't have to make up rules and then impose them upon people as if he's some sort of, all-powerful entity. No. Instead, the one in charge can say, my job is to look to what is right and good and then defend it. Right? I'm here to help promote what is right and good. It's not about me. It's about what's right and good for the whole. And I am the humble servant of the community that's been entrusted to me. My job is to find and to promote the truth about what is really good here. Meaning how we should function together. What's the balance and the equilibrium that we need to strike? What's the end goal of what we're trying to do? If a leader doesn't have a sense of truth, they can't lead. Instead, they can just dominate. It's a difference between domination and leadership. Domination is arbitrary. It's a simple exercise of power of one person over another. So since I have capital and you have labor, capital will dominate labor, and the two will be in strife. This is the whole communist vision of the world. Well, that's because communism is arbitrary. It does not hold that there's a transcendent good. We're not communist. We're Christian, okay? And Christians say that there is a transcendent good, and that transcendent good is what the leader needs to lead towards. And that means that his leadership, the exercise of his authority over the people entrusted to him, the role of a boss in the workplace, or of a mother in a family, it's dependent on that good, on the right way to live, on the best way to be, which also means, is in a beautiful way, that for the person being governed, the worker or the child or the student or the citizen for that matter, doesn't have anything to fear from the fact that they're being governed. It actually is a benefit to them because the government is bound to the truth of the good that they are made for. And by allowing themselves to be governed, well, supposedly they're strengthened because their leader is there to serve them on their pathway to doing what is right and to working in the best way. I mean, if a leader in a business is good, for example, the business will thrive. Jobs will be more secure, raises will increase, there'll be a better set of working conditions, and the business itself will be stabilized. And with this, how could that be bad, right? And in order for that to be good, to be profitable, well, there has to be a mutual collaboration and respect amongst the workers. People are put on the right seats on the bus. Everything works well when a leader leads according to what is necessary for the thriving and the good of the business and the workers. And that's all guaranteed by truth. So when Benedict speaks about your authority, the very first thing I need to encourage you to do is not be afraid to exercise it, right? And get over the fact that you feel like you're in conflict with those who are around you. You're not in conflict, you're in communication. And you're in communication as you move the person that you're communicating with from passivity to activity, from potency to actuality, right? From what is to what could be. And so, there's change. Leadership is about mitigating that change, inciting that change, governing that change, but the change is for the good, right? It's also about collaboration, being the bridge between one person and the next, establishing the laws and the processes by which human beings can collaborate. What a gift it is to have leadership. It's a gift to everybody who receives that leadership. And it's also a gift to you. And because by so doing, you get to share somehow in the work of God, who brings us to make this world better through him and with him by uniting and unifying things that are otherwise dispergent, bringing them into one single harmonious action. It's an awesome thing to lead, and we shouldn't be afraid of it when we see that leadership is dependent on and pointed towards truth. The truth about what is really good.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
At the heart of Saint Benedict's vision of leadership is the notion that leadership is an exercise of authority that leads someone to a better state. I'm thinking, for example, about the time when I used to work as a roofer. It was hard in many ways, certainly very hot, dangerous work, exposed to sun and chemicals, all day long. And yet, one of the neatest things about it was that at the beginning of the day, we would rip off a section of roof, and then we knew that by the end of the day, we would have a finished new roof laid over that section. All right, so you had to be careful because thunderstorms could come in. You're always watching the weather, and you had to be careful that whatever you tore off in the morning, you could actually cover by the end of the day. But by the end of the day, you could look at what you did, turn around and say, man, that we just made this world a little bit better. And because we worked with our hands, we were able to experience that, feel that in a sensible way. Well, the role of having authority in Benedict's notion of leadership is to preserve and protect that drive that your people have, that your families have, that each individual has, and that right that they have to real fulfillment. Well, to do that, the leader, he says, has to do three things. And he goes here and quotes St. Paul. He takes the line straight out of St. Paul, which is very interesting because sometimes people say, oh, gosh, where do these guys get this from? It's so arbitrary. Well, Benedict got it right from the Bible. Titus 2:15, where St. Paul tells St. Titus how to be a good leader. And he uses three words. He says you need to convince, you need to entreat, and you need to rebuke. All right? So Benedict says this is what the abbot needs to be able to do to his monks. Entreat, convince, and rebuke. And I think we can apply this to, our family parenting styles, our grandparenting style, our relationship with our friends, obviously in due proportion, but I think it's a wonderful leadership lesson for us because it comes to us right from St. Paul in the Bible, and Benedict teaches us how to apply it in a communal setting, all right? So I'm quoting here from the Rule of Saint Benedict. If you wanted to look at where it's found in chapter 2, what kind of man an abbot ought to be. And so he begins his treatment here by speaking something that's important for us. He says that whenever we exercise authority, we need to be flexible depending on the circumstances. We have to be able to mingle, he says, gentleness with severity. I think a lot of us struggle at this point. How do you mingle gentleness with severity? It seems like you should either be one or the other, either engaged in your leadership or removed from it. And he says, no, you need to be engaged in leadership and understand that you have to look at how the person in front of you is acting. What do they need from you at that moment? And adapt your leadership style to the circumstances of the people that you're leading. This is important. It's very similar to what St. Thomas Aquinas says about teaching. He says, when you're teaching somebody or speaking to somebody, you need to speak to them according to the way that they are ready to receive it, not according to the way that you know it. We need to adjust, in other words, our leadership to the circumstances of the people that we are leading. This is not easy to do. It requires a lot of humility and it requires a lot of flexibility on our parts. But it's also what's going to guarantee our success. I mean, do we want to succeed in our authority or not? If you want to succeed as you exercise authority, you have to adapt your authority and the way that you're exercising it to where the people are. And that's exactly the insight that Benedict gives us in his Rule of Life. So let's take a look at it together. So he specifically focuses in on three different cases, again, styling himself on the words of St. Paul in Titus 2:15. The first case is for those who are, as he puts it, undisciplined and restless. All right. The second is for those who are meek and patient. And then the third are those who are negligent and haughty. All right. But in this, those words might not sound like they apply immediately to your circumstances, but in fact, they describe three different dispositions that we can find in wherever we are leading. We can find this in our classroom with our students. You can find this in your workplace with your employees. You can find this in your own family. It's going to be three different dispositions. And he begins with what he calls the undisciplined and the restless. What he means by that are folks that have not yet decided where they're going. They don't yet know the direction of their life or of their behavior, right? So they're just there, listless. And it's interesting that Benedict begins with them saying, let's be sure that we convince those folks. Now, that might strike us as odd because most of us live in a way of life today that rather celebrates indecision. Almost like saying, it's okay just to keep your options open, not really take a stance, keep moving forward, as you can without making waves. And as long as nobody bothers you, well, then you're going to be okay. We end up judging success by lack of conflict instead of by arriving at the goal, right? And this is a very prevalent view in the eyes of many, which means the behaviors of those that we are leading are often going to be governed by this. If you ask them what they believe in, where they stand on certain issues, or where they stand on even the way that something should get done, well, they'll point to what the manager tells them to say, or they'll say, this is what the crowd told me to do, or this is what everybody does today. And you say, I know, but is that true, right? And that type of discussion is oftentimes off-putting for them. And Benedict says we need to convince those people. It kind of reminds me of a saying that G.K. Chesterton once said. He was a famous Catholic author in the turn of the 19th century. He said, an open mind is like an open mouth. Eventually, it needs to close on something. There's no problem with not knowing. There's no problem with searching. But we search in order to find, right? We don't know in order to learn. But if we keep ourselves in a perpetual state of not knowing on purpose, well, we remain undisciplined and restless, which means we can be easily influenced to go in the wrong direction simply by the social pressures of those who are around us. And Benedict says, convince those people. Now, the word convince is interesting because the word has Latin roots, which literally means to bind by, right? To bind by an argument. So it means to bring the strength of truth to bear on whatever situation is there. Very interesting, right? I mean, how many times do we think about this? That we have the authority that we have as parents or grandparents, and what do we have to do with that authority? Well, we just need to bring truth to it, to use our reason to explain and to point out the reasons why behind things. It doesn't always work because a lot of times people just aren't willing to think, but a lot of times it does. And especially in our situation today where there's not a lot of that going on. It seems like today everyone wants to convince by the force of threat or the force of emotions, and not a lot of people are willing to actually engage in real debate. Well, that's an advantage for us, to be intellectually sharp enough on why we do what we do, to understand the real argument behind things, so that then we can explain, we can convince by truth those people who otherwise couldn't be persuaded, in order to galvanize the team's unity and to bring the team to real success. And that's our job as leaders. It's also the most respectful way to lead because you're actually complimenting the people that you're in front of by speaking to them intelligently. And isn't it wonderful that that comes right from Scripture? What's the very first thing that St. Paul tells Titus to do when it comes to leading his people? He says, convince them, show them truth. Let truth be stronger than emotions, and let truth drive you greater than fear.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
So trying to understand the Rule of Saint Benedict and the wisdom that this great saint and the wisdom of this great saint that we can apply in our leadership today. And we look to try to understand that the 3 different words that he uses that we need to apply in our leadership positions. And he says you need to convince, you need to entreat, and you need to rebuke. He says you need to convince the undisciplined and restless, you need to entreat the obedient, the meek, and the patient, and you need to rebuke the negligent and the haughty. I think it's kind of interesting that Benedict mentions in here explicitly that this is a difficult and arduous task. Difficult and arduous. Why? Because he says you have to adapt yourself to many different dispositions. And I think about that as a common theme for us in leadership. It's hard because when you're a leader, you have to both be driven to the end goal that you're trying so hard to achieve, and you have to be driven despite all odds and in all vicissitudes and to not give up. And that requires a real kind of inner drive to push forward. At the same time, you have to adapt yourself to your people. It depends on where they're at, the circumstances that they're at. And sometimes they need convincing, sometimes they need entreating, sometimes they need correction, right? And rebuking. And you might have to do the same thing in the same day, or the same thing in one group to 3 different people. And that requires that you be as driven towards connecting with your people as you are towards achieving the end goal. It's an extraordinary thing. And that's why Benedict even says it's a difficult and arduous task to lead people. And we all understand this because the flexibility that requires from us will also require virtue. But remember that the reason we do this is as an act of service and love to the community that we lead. And so if you are capable of leadership, then you need to embrace that demand. Don't push forward so fast that you lose touch with the fact that the people following you are going to be in different situations at different times, and you need to be able to adjust to them. Even Benedict, way back in the 6th century, is writing this commandment and teaching us to do this. Even he had to do this back then. And I just kind of smile to say that he says this is difficult and arduous. Because I know a lot of people in their leadership, it seems to be the easiest thing for them to build the team, to connect with the people. And so they went smiling and said, what is that? How could Benedict say this is difficult and arduous? To adapt yourself to dispositions. And I just smile and say, well, that's because your style of leadership favors the team building. There's another style of leader that's all about inventing and driving and innovating. And that person can have a hard time sometimes to bend down and to take the time to bond and to empathize and to build that team. And so maybe Benedict was one of those types of leaders. Who knows? But he certainly was human like the rest of us. And he gives great advice. He says the first group, for someone who's restless and undisciplined, convince them with truth. There's another group, he says, though, a different disposition. People who are already obedient, meek, and patient. We're almost like, well, gosh, this is terrific. Especially because when Benedict says obedient, he means it. This word is throughout his whole rule of life as the key word for what he calls humility. And he says humility is what's going to bring the monk to heaven. So when he says this person is obedient, it's really a compliment. And when we think of that, wouldn't it be wonderful to have an employee who's obedient, meek, and patient? He said, exactly. What do you do with those people? And then he says, entreat, to entreat them. You entreat them that they progress still better. And I find that fascinating because it's almost like Benedict saying the goal is not that someone be obedient, meek, and patient. The goal is that that person flourish, right? That they give the best of who they are. And so you have a great disposition, but that requires work from the leader that you help them to progress. And obviously, we're thinking here about our employees, right? We're thinking about the people that we work with, but I want you to also think about your own spouse. Remember what it says in the Bible, iron sharpens iron, right? Which means that if someone is great, we need to rise to the occasion of their greatness and their disposition and what they're ready for. Meet them there and sharpen them. As a spouse, your first requirement that the church requires of you is that you bring that person to heaven. Not just that you get along, not just that everything be calm and that you can live lives side by side, but that together you help each other to grow, right? So here it is. When someone is obedient, meek, and patient, what do? Well, then you help them to be even better. You take that disposition and you hone it. And we need to apply this, obviously, in the workplace as well, because we need to remember to invest in our people and to give them the opportunities that they need to grow. When they're looking for it, Benedict says you need to, at that time, adopt your authority as a real act of service and entreat them, help them, push them further along so that they don't backslide. And this, of course, brings us to the third case, which is, to admonish, he says, rebuke, and correct those who are negligent and haughty. Very interesting. Again, his own disposition shines through here. You can kind of see, for Benedict, he doesn't just stop at external behaviors. He kind of goes and looks at their inner dispositions, the haughty or the negligent, those who just don't care, or those who exalt themselves. And here Benedict says that we need to rebuke and correct. Well, obviously, this is a little bit delicate, especially in the workplace, right? But I think you can apply this appropriately by looking at it to say there's times in our lives where we simply have to say no. Where we simply have to say, this is wrong. I think, well, in a manufacturing plant, for example, the importance that you have as the boss of running out the bad apples, right? This is honestly, there's times where on a team, you need to put the line down and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the team. And that can seem harsh. It can be difficult. But whenever someone is, as Benedict says, haughty and negligent, they're ruining it for the others. They're making a toxic work environment, or at least a negative workspace that will diminish the success of the whole team, but it will also cause others to suffer. You'll almost say, whenever you take a stance and you say this person needs to be corrected, you can see the others in the room relax. When someone leaves who has been bothering everybody else on the whole team, well, the team will function better for it. Now, obviously, I'm not speaking here about doing something that's rash or doing something that's against somebody. No. Calm, patient, gentle in all that we do, and yet firm and strong. In other words, it's the truth that I'm serving, not my own ego and not my position. When I put the line down, sometimes we say, oh, that means I'm exalting myself. You're not. Instead, you're exalting the line. You're saying, just like a road needs boundaries, and if you don't have the lines on the side of the road, you'll go off the road into your peril. Well, in the same way, and operating together on a team has obvious limitations, and it's the job of the driver of the car to stay on the road. It's the job of the team leader to keep the organization functioning. And when someone's pulling you off the road, well, sometimes you got to pull them back. These 3 statements by Benedict outline an arduous and difficult task: to lead people according to their disposition, and to do it by using the words of Scripture themselves, to convince, to entreat, and to rebuke with all authority, right? And using what we have as an act of service. That's what leadership is.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.